How did your husband react when you told him you were pregnant? When my husband and I first started dating, he couldn't get enough of my culture. I'm Japanese. He grew up in a tiny town in Colorado, where the closest thing to Japanese food was grocery store sushi. He'd ask me to teach him Japanese words. He loved when I cooked the recipes my grandmother taught me. He even celebrated my first New Year's after we got married by trying to make homemade mochi. It was terrible. We laughed about it for hours, but somewhere along the way, things changed. Whenever I'd call my parents and speak Japanese, he'd quietly leave the room. If I suggested watching a Japanese movie, he'd say, "Can we watch something we'll both understand?" If I wanted to cook traditional meals after work, he'd suggest ordering burgers instead. He never said he disliked my culture. He just slowly stopped making space for it. We'd always dreamed about having children. Before we got married, we'd promised we'd raise them bilingual. They'd know both sides of their family, both traditions, both homes. But after a few years of marriage, I wasn't sure anymore. Then one morning, I stared at 2 pink lines on a pregnancy test. Instead of immediately telling him, I got scared. Would our child grow up knowing my language, or would they slowly lose it, the way I felt I was? So I decided to do something. For 1 week, I stopped shrinking myself. I filled our home with everything I'd been quietly setting aside. I spoke Japanese whenever I called my parents. I cooked the meals I'd grown up eating, miso soup, homemade gyoza, curry rice. I played the old songs my grandmother used to sing while cooking. Our apartment suddenly felt like my childhood again. The first day, he looked confused. "Babe, what's all this?" I smiled. "I just miss home," he nodded, but I could tell he felt uncomfortable. The second day, he asked why I was speaking so much Japanese. Instead of apologizing, I simply said, "Because it's part of who I am." He didn't argue. He just got quiet. On the third day, I came home from work and found sticky notes all over the apartment. The refrigerator, the couch, the television. Every object had its Japanese name written underneath. I laughed. "What are you doing?" He scratched the back of his neck. "If our future kid is going to know Japanese, I should probably learn too." My heart skipped. The next morning, he greeted me with, "Ohio." His pronunciation was awful. I couldn't stop laughing. He laughed too. Every day after work, he'd ask me to teach him 5 new words. Sometimes we'd spend an hour laughing because he'd accidentally say something completely different. One evening, he proudly announced he wanted to tell me I looked beautiful. Instead, he accidentally called me delicious. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped dinner. By the 5th day, something had changed. He wasn't learning because I asked. He was learning because he genuinely wanted to. That evening, he surprised me. I'd come home expecting another normal dinner. Instead, the apartment looked completely different. Paper lanterns hung across the living room. Soft music played in the background. He'd even folded dozens of little origami cranes. They weren't perfect. Some looked more like ducks. But he'd tried. He took my hands and quietly said, "I've been thinking. When we first met, I loved learning about your world. I don't know when I stopped trying." I think I got embarrassed. "Embarrassed?" He nodded. "The more Japanese you spoke, the more I realized how little I knew. So instead of learning, I avoided it." He looked down at the floor. "I'm sorry, but I never wanted you to feel like you had to leave part of yourself outside our front door." I couldn't hold back my tears anymore. The next morning, he video called my parents by himself. My mother answered. Before I could say anything, he bowed awkwardly toward the camera and introduced himself entirely in Japanese. It wasn't perfect, not even close. My dad burst out laughing halfway through. My mom started crying. After the call ended, he looked at me nervously. "So, did I completely embarrass myself?" I smiled. "No, you made my parents love you even more." He wrapped his arms around me. "I just want our future kids to know every part of where they come from." I looked up at him. "Our future kids?" He frowned. "What?" I reached into my pocket and handed him the tiny envelope I'd been carrying around all week. Inside was the pregnancy test. For a second, he didn't move. Then he looked at me. Back at the test. Back at me again. His eyes immediately filled with tears. "We're having a baby?" I nodded. He hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. After a long moment, he rested one hand gently against my stomach. Then he smiled. "Okay, teach me one more word." "What word?" "The one our baby will call me." I smiled through happy tears. In Japanese, it's Oda-san. He whispered it over and over again until he finally got it right. And in that moment, I knew our child would never have to choose between 2 cultures. They'd grow up surrounded by both.